I know lots of people in the Chinese community, my wife being Chinese and all, and one thing I've noticed over the last few years is this. Many Chinese people that we get to know come to live in Australia. They seem fairly frugal when they arrive, in that they find a cheap house or units to rent. They often complain that they can't find a good job and have to settle for jobs working in massage parlours or abattoirs, and that's fine. People have to do what they have to do. But then suddenly, a year or two later, they purchase a massive house in Brisbane and a brand new Tesla, with no explanation as to how they did it. Now, I can't believe for a second that the meatworks or massage job earned them that much money over a short period of time. Perhaps they're leasing the car and got a massive mortgage, but I feel like there's something else going on. But of course, they never tell us what, and we never find out. This has happened enough in the last few years that both my wife and I have become very suspicious. If you look at the figures, realestate.com's overseas search report for October 2023 state that interest from overseas property seekers is skyrocketing due to recent record immigration. This chart shows the annual change in buy and rent search volumes from overseas property seekers, with buying in red and renting in blue. I guess it's no surprise that the biggest increase in buying interest was from China at 36.9%. Interestingly, the biggest increase in renting was from New Zealanders. Search volumes from Hong Kong, Singapore and India had significant reductions, but certainly China is the standout. Unsurprisingly, the top locations for foreign buyers were the big cities: Melbourne, Gold Coast, Brisbane, Sydney and Perth. You wonder why Australian housing is becoming severely unaffordable? Well, this is certainly partly the reason. I'll talk more on that soon. Also unsurprisingly, as the number of migrants increase, so does the number of people searching for a place to rent. Blue shows the number of permanent visa holders and student arrivals, which directly correlates with the number of rent searches. If you want to know why there's a rental crisis, well, here's one of the reasons. But for whatever reason, the government refused to reduce immigration. They obviously get some sort of economic benefit from it. If struggling Australians can't afford a house or find a place to rent, so what, they say. Consequences be damned. In other news, there's rumours that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese might actually visit Australia sometime next year. It will be the first visit by an Australian leader to Australia since late 2022. Obviously, this is a dig at Mr. Albanese's jet-setting ways. He'd rather be meeting with the likes of Xi Jinping and Joe Biden than dealing with the cost of living disaster that he's left behind in Australia. Australian homes are no longer for Australians. Chinese outrun other foreign buyers in dash for housing. Nuts. Why millionaires are flooding into Oz? It's a good question. Here's a map from Visual Capitalist. According to the Henley Private Wealth Migration Report 2023, more than 13,000 millionaires are expected to have left China by the end of this year, the most of any country. And guess where they're going? You guessed it, Australia. Australia has reclaimed the top position for net millionaire arrivals. Wealthy Chinese love Australia. According to realestate.com, Australia now top destination for cashed-up Chinese home buyers. But why Australia? And where's all this cash coming from? Well, it all started over a decade ago. In 2009, then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd made the somewhat short-sighted decision to allow temporary migrants to purchase established housing, resulting in a subsequent boom in temporary migration, boosting demand for Australian homes. Secondly, apparently Australia has one of the weakest anti-money laundering laws in the world, which has made Australian property a great way for laundering dirty money, no questions asked. There are talks of reforming this, and Australia did agree in 2003 to introduce global Tranche 2 anti-money laundering regulation, but federal governments from both sides repeatedly delayed its implementation. A report from Paris-based Financial Action Task Force from 2015 warned that Australian residential property is a haven for international money laundering, particularly from China, with billions of dollars laundered in Australian property. Of course, many real estate agents do not want these regulations because that would end their lucrative gravy train. Peter Lee, principal at Plus Agency, is a self-described property guru who mainly deals with Chinese buyers, said, Foreign buyer inquiries have quadrupled from last year and sales have doubled. International buying will definitely increase during the next year. There is more activity in terms of flights, so it's increasingly easier to get in and out of Australia. No, this is not a Giorgio Armani fashion catalogue. This is luxury property developer PB&Co in the affluent suburb of Toorak in Melbourne. Buyer's agent Alex Brajilevsky recently said, "I have facilitated $135 million of real estate deals in Toorak in the past 6 months, with 90% of my clientele from China. They come to Melbourne on a private jet and I'll meet them at the airport with a nice car. Then we go out and look at real estate." David Morell, director of Morell & Corrin, a top-end real estate firm, described the foreign buyer situation as nuts. He said, "We are seeing jumps of $2 to $3 million on properties. We have a marketplace that is disproportionately being sold to Chinese buyers relative to the rest of the population. What's happening in Toorak is only a look at what is happening under the blankets across the country." And lastly, there's also a special type of visa that essentially facilitates money laundering in Australia, the so-called golden ticket visa, the significant investor visa, which was introduced by former Labor Treasurer Chris Bowen in 2012 and requires the applicant to invest $5 million in Australia. It has operated for more than 10 years with almost zero rejections, with Chinese citizens making up around 90% of successful applicants. Noting that at the time of recording, direct investment in residential real estate is prohibited. Indirect investment in residential property through managed funds is strictly limited. This visa is not permanent, lasting 5 years, but you can bring your family with you and you can apply for a permanent visa at the end. Basically, if you're rich, even if the source of your money is questionable, you can come to Australia and buy a house, pumping up the property market, pricing locals out of housing, with Australia remaining a global magnet and shelter for dirty, laundered money.